Okay, welcome back to Aliens for Breakfast. We are going to begin chapter 2. If you remember in our last chapter, the alien has arrived in our main character, Richard Bickerstaff's cereal box. Remember, he was freeze dry. He has arrived in the cereal box, and they are heading to school to go get Dorf, who is also an alien, but he is a drain. Let's see what happens next. Chapter 2. Richard slid into his seat just as math was starting. He was under strict orders from Eric to act normal. "Do not let anyone know about me," he had told Richard on the way to school. "If the drain finds out I am here, you can kiss this planet goodbye." So now Richard couldn't stare at Dorf, even though he wanted to. Instead, he had to pretend that the only thing on his mind was the question Mrs. Marks was asking. As usual, it was a hard one. "Who knows how many ways we can make change for $1?" she asked. She looked around the room slowly, then she stared straight at Richard. His heart sank. "Richard?" she asked. Richard knew you could get 4 quarters or 10 dimes or 100 pennies for $1. But that was too easy. This was a trick question with a trick answer, only he didn't know the answer. "Any ideas, Richard?" asked Mrs. Marks. 4? Only 4? 5, he said quickly. He would have to bluff. "Who thinks there are more?" asked Mrs. Marks. "There must be at least 10, called Henry. He was good at trick questions. What about a mixture of nickels, dimes, and pennies, or nickels, quarters, and half dollars? Half dollars, thought Richard. I forgot those. Then Dorf raised his hand. He had a big smile on his face. It showed off his perfect white teeth. "Yes, Dorf," said Mrs. Marks. "There are 292 ways to change a dollar bill," said Dorf. All the kids in the class stared at Dorf. How did he come up with that number? "Good guess!" exclaimed Mrs. Marks. "It's not a guess," said Dorf. "I figured it out last summer on my computer." "Well, you're very clever indeed," said Mrs. Marks, "because that is the right answer. Can anyone explain why?" Her eyes moved up and down the rows. Richard tried to look invisible. "You have pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, and half dollars," continued Dorf. 146 coins in all, but you can mix them in all kinds of ways, like 5 pennies, 2 dimes, 5 nickels, and a half dollar, or 45 pennies, a nickel, and 2 quarters. There are hundreds of ways to do it. 292 ways to be exact," he finished smoothly. Mrs. Marks didn't smile a lot, but she smiled now, and everyone in the class nodded as if Dwarf had just said something important and wonderful. "He has begun to control their minds," said Eric. Richard jumped. For a moment he had forgotten about the alien in his pocket. Now he felt a thrill of alarm at Eric's words. What should he do? "I told you before," said Eric's voice. "Just act normal. Do you understand?" "Yes," said Richard silently, sensing that Eric could hear his thoughts. He felt hot and nervous, but at least math was over. He walked over to Henry's seat with his lunchbox. They always traded sandwiches after math. Richard's mother had made him tuna on whole wheat, which he hated. Henry's mother made him peanut butter and jelly, which he hated, so they traded. But when Richard got to Henry, Henry was already eating a sandwich. It looked like tuna fish. Dorf was sitting next to Henry. He was eating a sandwich too. It looked like peanut butter and jelly. "Hey," said Richard, "don't you want to trade?" "Already have," said Henry with his mouth full. "Traded with Dorf. His eyes, when he turned to Richard, looked funny, almost as if they weren't focused right. "But we always trade," said Richard. "Here, Richard, have of mine," said Dorf. He offered his peanut butter and jelly with a smile. "Do not look at his teeth." Eric's voice popped into Richard's mind. "They send out dangerous drain rays that will bring you under his control. Look only into his eyes. They cannot harm you." Richard took a deep breath and turned to Henry. "Hate tuna fish," he said, "and we always trade. How could you give my sandwich away?" "It's not your sandwich. Anyway, Dorf got to me first," said Henry. Richard sputtered with anger. "He's a—" Before he could say drain monster, Henry broke in. "He's a great guy," said Henry. His mouth was still full of tuna fish. "He's got his own VCR, and all the Mad Max tapes, and he's going to let me watch them on Saturday." "Why don't you come too?" said Dora. "A whole bunch of kids from the class are coming. It'll be fun." "Hate Mad Max," said Richard, though this wasn't true. Then he saw that Henry was staring straight at Dora, right at Dora's perfect smile. "And besides, I'm already busy," he finished weakly. Then he sat down at his desk and looked blankly at his tuna sandwich. Earth is in big trouble, thought Richard Bickerstaff. And that ends a very short but informative chapter 2. Remember to come back and see me again for chapter 3.